Welcome back to the Family Business Show, and I'm John Broons, and today my guest is Darren. And we're talking about wines and Willespie wines. So Darren, just quickly, well not quickly, tell us some of the challenges that you've faced. We hear that in our conversation earlier there was some issues that happened with Mum and Dad, but I'm sure over the last 5 or 6 years there's been some challenges that you've faced.
Yeah, I mean, when we were first looking at taking the business over, that obviously would require a movement of assets from the way that Mum and Dad had it set up. All of the assets in terms of the land and the buildings were sitting inside a partnership. So legally speaking, it's not terribly flexible and there's no real protection for anything. So the first thing that had to be done, and this process took 6 to 9 months to actually get done, we had to move assets from the partnership into a new vehicle, if you like. So we basically moved everything into a unit trust, and then we all had our own family trusts, which we set up as the beneficiaries with a corporate trustee. So the long and the short of it is that transferring the assets around between a partnership and another legal entity raised a whole heap of issues when it comes to taxation, stamp duty and government-related red tape. So what ended up happening is to actually allow us to put those assets into somewhere where it had a little bit more protection and a little bit more flexibility. We ended up having to pay stamp duty on transferring assets, even though it's only between family members still, which for us was a major impediment to getting the business and running with it. So the effect was that the money that we paid to the WA state government for stamp duty for transferring those assets was pretty much lost to the business. So instead of actually being able to go ahead and doing a whole heap of works and renovations on the buildings, we didn't have the money to do that. So that was a major impediment, and you look back at that money and think, well, where's it gone? It hasn't really done us any good whatsoever. But it's one of those things that and it's probably something that anyone who's starting a family business or a small business really needs to consider. When they do things, get your structure right up front. Otherwise, you'll end up being bitten on the backside by whether it be the ATO or the State Revenue Department.
Structure's critical.
It is.
And I suppose Mum and Dad in their life had never really thought about it, had never been challenged by it, so never considered it.
And the thing is too that the legislation changes as time goes on. Mum and Dad started that partnership nearly 40 years ago, so things may not have been the same as what they are now. But it's very important to stay abreast of what's going on and making sure that if you do have the opportunity to put something into a structure that's going to protect not just the assets, but you and your family as well, that you take that opportunity and you do it, because otherwise you'll pay the price further down the track. So, a lot of government red tape basically meant that instead of something being nice and clean and simple, it was rather convoluted and rather painful.
So there was a time challenge there and a finance challenge.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So bottom line was we've now got it into a structure which is protected and flexible. So if we need to change ownership, we can do. We've also got, Mum and Dad actually had the business operating through a company that's still going. So that side of it's still okay, but the assets have been moved around. So I guess the main thing at the start was that, and then also refinancing. So the winery actually had quite a bit of debt when we took it over. So we had to refinance that with other banks. So a lot of the banks being very much anti-agribusiness, were very much gun shy about loaning money. And especially at that point in time to wineries, they weren't really that keen on giving money to wineries. So we basically had our current overdraft mortgage with Bank West. They'd been taken over by CBA, and CBA was basically telling them to get rid of all your agribusiness stuff. We don't want it. So then we basically ended up moving to NAB. So my sister Jenny, who runs the daycare centres, she's got a lot of money hooked up with NAB. So then they also said, okay, well, we'll take that on and, you know, guarantors and all the sort of rigmarole you have to do to give security to the bank to get that in place. So those were very big challenges at the outset to even get the thing moved so we can actually then start doing stuff.
The whole dynamic of being able to utilise networks within the family was one of the advantages of being a family.
Yes,
in this
exactly.
regard.
Yes,
and diverse. So your experience being outside of the family business, being the winery, was beneficial. It was able to find other ways around some of the issues.
Well, it's basically a case of, being an accountant and having that kind of background, I sort of know, structures and what works and what doesn't, and where you should put things and where you shouldn't put things. It was just that when we took it over, it was where it shouldn't have been, so that we had to move everything, which was that was the painful part. But then basically while all this was happening, the winery was still running, so Mum and Dad were still actually doing stuff in the winery at that point. And then gradually they eased out, and we then got a couple of people for cellar door. We had an incumbent winemaker at that point in time. He wasn't really the fit for us, but we found another winemaker, Nathan Schultz, who's now working with us now, and he'd been at Willespie about 12 years ago. Okay. And then he'd been away and gotten a lot more experience. He'd been to Tasmania and Austria, and he was coming back to WA, looking to settle down. So I got wind of that, touched base with him, and he's now our winemaker. So we've got three permanent, we've got one permanent and two permanent part-time staff at the winery, and they've all been in place for 2 years now. So it's a very solid bedrock for running the business. So now it's a case of a lot of the day-to-day stuff can be taken care of without major intervention from us.
How did the family dynamics work? So the last while you were doing all this transitioning, and 3 sisters, one with 4 kids, and
yep. We've had
brothers-in-law.
Yeah,
everybody's got an opinion.
Everybody's got an opinion. Decisions tend to take a while. They're not necessarily as prompt or as quick as they need to be, but they do get made. And the problem also with having 4, if you have a vote, there's no casting votes. So it's another thing that's it's a work in progress as well. But basically, like I was saying before, one of my sisters pretty much she's hands off. Another sister has also she's got a whole heap of other stuff on her plate at the minute. So it's really been myself and my older sister who have been very hands on.
Okay.
And now my second eldest sister is becoming more involved with the business as well. So she's starting to show a lot more interest in it and doing more stuff with it too.
What about tips? What about some of the things, if somebody's in a family business today and they're looking for some ideas because they don't know what's going on with Mum and Dad, how did you go about tips about the change and the intervention?
I think the first thing to consider is, okay, if you've got a family business and that business has been around for a while, or even if it's new, I guess, what is the plan for that business? Is it just a case of, if Mum and Dad stop, that's it, that's the end of the business? Or is there a plan for it to actually go on into the future? Because if there's a plan for it to go into the future, then you actually need to plan for it. So it's just not a case of a knee-jerk reaction going, oh, hang on, we've now got to actually do something with this business because Mum and Dad can't do it anymore. Or
well, there's a great statement. I think it's a quote, failing to plan is planning to fail.
Yes, spot on. Couldn't be any more succinct than that.
Yeah.
But it's having the discussion. It's actually making the discussion happen that, guess what, you're not going to go on forever. Something needs to happen with this plan, or there needs to be a plan put in place to say that, okay, do you want it to continue, or is it going to be sold? Or do you want us to come in and take it over? Because that's really the thing, is like, well, if the kids are out there running their own lives, doing their own things, it's not necessarily the forefront of thought that I'm going to go in and take over the family business if you're already out there doing something. If you're in the family business, you still need to have the discussion, But it's probably something that's a little bit more front of mind rather than a bit of a, oh, what's happening now?
Okay. So the tips: have a plan,
Definitely.
have conversations,
Yep.
and the conversations are not light-hearted conversations; they're deep conversations.
Yes.
Really clarifying conversations. How did you find? I mean, you yourself are a qualified financial expert, an accountant. Your sister's a professional person. How many other outside experts did you need to find?
Well, we had a lawyer that was involved as part of the transfer process. Also, we had another lawyer that was involved in setting up unit trust and discretionary trusts for our own family discretionary trusts. And obviously, in terms of, people that we brought on board to help us, that would pretty much be it. But then obviously had quite in-depth discussions with the State Revenue Department, people who were related to selling property, so they were involved in the whole transfer of the property as well. But in terms of the actual running of the business, not a lot, and I guess that's probably because even though we weren't hands-on in the business, we'd all been around it all our lives, so we pretty much already knew how the place worked and what everything was. I mean, I'd been involved in the business probably around the time when Mum got ill, so I'd been doing stuff there as well, but it was just basically just to help out for a bit.
It was more like the weekend, something to do.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of extra stuff that I had to do.
Yeah.
Whereas now, it's much more involved.
Mm-hmm.
But that is sort of decreasing over time as well with the guys being on deck down south.
And the future, where do you see? I mean, I'm hearing a lot of grandchildren are in the wings sitting there. Is there a part of the plan and strategy for next generations again?
Well, between us there's 3, 6, 9, I think we've got 13 grandchildren.
At present?
At present. And they have a very wide range of ages, 32 down to 6. So it's a very, very wide field.
Yep.
And also within that group, there's also a very wide and varied skill set as well, which is a good thing. Obviously, the further the generations go, the more diluted things become, and it becomes harder and harder to manage. So that in itself is going to be another conversation that needs to happen to see what people's appetite is for being involved in the business and what they see it doing. But in terms of where we are now, I sort of started out this with a 5-year plan in my head, and we're kind of 3.5 years into that now. And it's pretty much on track, which is nice. So Cellar Door basically needed to triple in that 5 years in order to help us finance the debt as well as finance staff and all the other overheads that you have of any business. So that's stepped up to the plate and it's doing what it needs to. We've also developed some export markets now, and they've been a big plus since that's basically only about 12, 18 months ago that we started doing that. And retail, we've now got an agent up here, we have an agent in Sydney, so all the bits are starting to flesh out. So I think in the next year and a half, if we keep going the way we are, we'll be on target to meet my goals that I'd sort of envisaged in the first 5 years.
Okay.
And then after that, another 5-year plan.
Another 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Are any of the grandchildren that are old enough showing any interest, or do they come down and work on weekends?
Well, I've got my niece. She's 32, but she makes her own wine, so she makes a barrel of wine every year. So she's quite keen into that kind of thing. One of my nephews does marketing, and he's sort of shown some interest as well. So as they get a bit older, there may well be a bit more of an inclination to do something, because I mean obviously it's an established business, and if you can get in there and help out, I'm sure they will. So yeah, who knows? It could be in the next 10 years there's a lot more interest shown, because at the minute they're all kind of, most of them around the sort of mid-20s to late teens or early teens, so they're not at the age where they're looking to settle down and get involved in the family business.
Sure.
It's not high on the priority list. They've got other things on their plate. But yes, it is a discussion that will be happening, and I'd say probably the next 5 years as well. So when this 5-year plan's gone, they may well be part of the next 5-year plan.
Okay, great. Darren, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
I want to thank Darren Squance from Willespie Wines for his contribution to the Family Business Show with me, John Broons. It's been revelatory to see that you can actually get along with siblings, go through challenges of interventions with parents, and still have this wonderful opportunity to keep growing the business into the future.
Yep.
So I want to thank you very much for today, and I want to thank Tech, the Executive Connection, for sponsoring today's show. John Broons, the Family Business Guy. Please subscribe to the channel.